You think you can't live without them. You can. You just don't want to face who you'd be without the leash. You call it love. Jung would call it possession. Not their possession of you, but your possession by a part of yourself you've never dared to meet. You've built your life around the pulse of another heart. Their moods dictate your sky. Their absence becomes your death. And when they withdraw, you feel the air sucked from your lungs. But here's the truth no one wants to touch. Emotional dependence isn't love. It's worship at the altar of your own abandonment wound. You're not clinging to them. You're clinging to the feeling of not being left. Every "I need you" is really, "Don't be my mother. Don't vanish." And the cruelest trick? Dependence will hollow you out until nothing remains but the craving. You won't know where they end, and you begin. You'll shrink to fit inside their approval. You'll bleed just to keep the connection alive. But Jung warned of this. The more you hand your soul to another, the more the shadow grows. And the shadow doesn't care about romance. It cares about control. That's why you feel safest in chains. Because freedom means facing yourself. And you've avoided that for years. There's a reason you keep choosing people you can't breathe without. There's a reason you mistake obsession for devotion. There's a reason the leash feels like home. This is the part no one tells you. You've confused love with oxygen. You think without them, you'll collapse. That's the prison. It's not the bars you can see. It's the ones inside your ribs. The ones that tighten every time they pull away. You wake up thinking about them. You go to sleep scanning for signs they still care. Your day rises and falls on their voice, their smile, their absence. When they're close, you exhale. When they're distant, you die in slow motion. This isn't romance. It's survival. And it's older than any relationship you've ever had. It began before you could name it. Before you could even speak. When love wasn't steady. When affection came with conditions. When comfort was something you had to earn. Maybe your mother's warmth vanished when she was tired, or angry, or sad. Maybe your father's attention came only when you performed. Maybe you learned early that safety wasn't a given, it was a reward. And your small body adapted. You became watchful. You studied their faces like weather patterns. You learned how to make them smile. You learned how to avoid their storms. You learned how to disappear when needed, and how to reappear when it was safe. Every scrap of affection was a feast. Every cold shoulder was starvation. And so your nervous system began its lifelong addiction. The high of being chosen after the fear of being forgotten. This is why you can't breathe when they're gone. Why you panic when their tone shifts. Why you scan every text for hidden threats. It's not about them. It's about the wound. The wound that whispers, you will only survive if they stay. Jung saw this as a possession by the unconscious, a state where the self is hijacked by an ancient, unmet need. In that possession, you will do anything to avoid the terror of loss. You'll lie, you'll beg, you'll sacrifice your boundaries. You'll burn your own house down if it means they won't walk away. And the tragedy? Even if they stay, you never feel safe. Because safety was never about their presence. It was about the part of you that never learned to exist alone. Until you face that part, every love will be a leash. Every touch will be a trade. Every kiss will taste like the fear of it ending. And that's how emotional dependence quietly destroys you. Jung would tell you this isn't just your story. It's an archetype, a pattern older than language. In myths, it's the soul who believes it cannot exist without the other. In fairy tales, it's the prisoner who holds the key but doesn't see it. In dreams, it's the drowning figure who doesn't notice they're in shallow water. This wound lives in the collective unconscious, the shared human memory of separation, abandonment, and exile. It shows up in every culture, in every century, because we're all born in total dependence. The infant doesn't survive without the caretaker. And when that caretaker is unpredictable, the body writes its laws in panic. Stay close or die. Those laws don't expire when you grow up. They just hide under adult disguises. Romance, friendship, ambition. But the unconscious doesn't care about the mask. It still believes you're a child, and love is the only shelter from the storm. That's why Jung called this state possession, not in the Hollywood horror sense, but in the way an archetype seizes the ego and makes it act out an ancient script. You think you're chasing a person. You're really chasing a mother you never had, a father who never came back, a home that never existed. The ego wants to believe this is about them. The unconscious knows it's about the lost self. And here's where it gets cruel. The shadow, the dark, unintegrated side of you, feeds on this hunger. It keeps you in relationships that mimic the original wound. It draws you to people who are inconsistent, withholding, or just out of reach. Not because you're cursed, but because some part of you believes, if I can make this one stay, I will finally rewrite the past. But the shadow doesn't want the past rewritten. It wants the wound to stay open, because that wound is its source of power. The shadow thrives on dependency. It keeps you small, compliant, hooked on scraps, terrified of solitude. It tells you stories. You're nothing without them. You'll never find another. No one else would understand you. It tells you these lies, so you never risk freedom. And every time you obey, you reinforce the prison bars inside your ribs. The philosopher Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Jung would say that solitude is unbearable for the dependent soul, because it exposes the wound in full daylight. When you're alone, the craving starts, not just for the person, but for the feeling of being held, the feeling you never got enough of. And without distractions, you start to feel the raw panic of that absence. The child inside you starts screaming, "Find them, bring them back," or "We will die." So you go back. Or you find a replacement. Or you bury yourself in noise. Scrolling, working, drinking, anything. This is how the wound becomes generational. Parents who can't sit with their own emptiness pass it on to their children. Not always through cruelty. Sometimes through absence. Sometimes through overprotection. Sometimes through being too lost in their own pain to notice yours. And so the cycle continues. But Jung didn't just diagnose the sickness. He gave us the map out. He said the first step is to see the possession for what it is. Not love, but compulsion. Not fate, but repetition. Not passion, but survival instinct dressed in evening clothes. When you name it, you create distance. The archetype loosens its grip. The shadow loses some of its power. But naming isn't enough. You have to meet the part of you that is still frozen in time. The part that is still waiting for the parent to come back. And when you meet it, you don't scold it for being needy. You don't shame it for being afraid. You do the one thing no one did back then. You stay. Not for them, for you. Because until you can sit quietly in that room alone and not mistake silence for death, every relationship will be a reenactment. The unconscious will keep casting the same actors, writing the same endings, until you take the pen back. Only then does love become choice instead of oxygen. Only then can you breathe on your own. You start to notice the cracks. Not in them in the story you've been telling. They don't reply fast enough. Their eyes wander in a conversation. They forget something you told them 3 weeks ago that mattered to you. Tiny moments, but they hit like earthquakes. Because they don't just mean they're distracted. They mean the god is slipping. You tell yourself you're overreacting. But in the quiet, your chest tightens. The old hunger roars awake. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. And so you grip tighter. You dress the fear in soft clothes. I just miss you. I feel like we're drifting. I need to know where I stand. But what you're really saying is, if you stop being my oxygen, I'll drown. This is the moment Nietzsche would smirk, because he knew that what we call love can often be disguised will to power, the desperate need to control the thing we fear losing. We demand promises not to soothe the other person, but to chain our own anxiety. And here's the paradox. The tighter you hold, the faster they pull away. Not because they don't care, but because The projection has become a prison for both of you. For them, the pressure is unbearable. For you, the pressure is survival. So when they finally step back, whether with silence, distance, or the sharp edge of "I need space," it doesn't just hurt. It shatters you. The image collapses. The God behind the curtain is gone, and what's left is a human being who was never able to be what you needed them to be. It feels like betrayal, but it's really exposure. The truth has been here all along. You weren't in love with them. You were in love with the part of yourself you exiled, the part you thought only they could bring back. And now, without them as a mirror, you're face to face with the emptiness you've been running from. This is the dark night Jung warned about. When the projection burns away and you're left standing in the ash. It's not romantic. It's not cinematic. It's raw, ugly, unbearably quiet. The mind scrambles for a fix. Reach out, beg, replace them. Anything but sit in the silence. But here's the thing. This silence is not a punishment. It's the doorway. If you can stay here, if you can resist patching the hole with another person, you might finally hear the voice underneath the hunger. The voice of the self you abandoned to survive. The child who learned to chase scraps of attention. The shadow you've been too afraid to love. If you can turn toward that shadow, without flinching, without bargaining, you'll find the source of the obsession. And when you see it clearly, you can stop mistaking a human being for a god. Stop mistaking longing for destiny. Stop mistaking the wound for love. It's not that you'll never love again. You will. But it won't be the fever that burns you hollow. It will be the warmth that doesn't disappear when they walk out of the room. The difference is everything. Because then, finally, you'll know that what you're breathing isn't their oxygen. It's your own. There comes a moment in a person's life when everything they thought they knew begins to melt, like wax under a slow flame. Jung had passed through that moment. He was returning from his long journey into the darkness of the unconscious, a realm where fractured dreams and strange symbols had become the only language. And the first thing he realized was that he was no longer the man who had departed. In his youth, Jung believed he needed only one thing: truth. But in the darkness he learned that truth is not a stone fixed and eternal. It is a river, winding and shifting, sometimes murky, sometimes frighteningly clear. He had once believed in a system, a structure, something to keep human beings safe from chaos. But the deeper he went inside, the more he saw that chaos was not the enemy, it was the raw material of life itself. Near the end of his crisis, Jung dreamed of an ancient house, a tall, many-storied house. The upper floors were bright and familiar, but as he descended, the levels grew darker, narrower, until he opened a hidden door into a Roman cellar. Below the cellar, there were massive stone slabs, fragments of bone, and a heavy feeling that he had touched the primordial roots of the human soul. Jung understood. The self we cling to is only a thin surface layer. Beneath it lie countless lives, memories, and images existing long before we were ever born. It was then that he began to shape the idea of the collective unconscious, a shared psychic foundation that links us all, carrying the ancient patterns of humanity. The archetypes, the deep images, the recurring myths, they were not simply products of the individual mind. They were older than history, older than language. When Jung returned to daily life, he did not come back as a triumphant hero, holding a fixed answer. He returned as a man who had made peace with not knowing but also with seeing. His work would never again be about building walls around the mind. It would be about building windows. He would later say that a person does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And in that statement lived the essence of his journey, the courage to face the shadows without needing them to disappear. For the rest of his life, Jung moved between worlds, the world of science and the world of myth, the realm of rational thought and the ocean of the unconscious. He would speak to patients, not as a mechanic fixing a broken machine, but as a fellow traveler who had seen the underworld and knew the terrain. And quietly, he carried within him the memory of those inner nights when his own mind had felt like a battlefield of gods and monsters. In the end, Jung's greatest teaching was not a theory, not a diagram, not a list of terms. It was an attitude, a willingness to listen to what the soul is saying, even when the words are strange, even when the images are frightening, even when the meaning is unclear. Because somewhere in that uncertainty lies the path forward, not away from ourselves, but deeper into who we really are. You are not broken. You are becoming. The wound you carry is not a curse. It is a map to the shadowed parts of yourself you have been too afraid to meet. You have been running from the silence, chasing ghosts that only your own soul can face. But now, there is another way. Not out there, in their eyes, but deep inside, where fear turns to fire and ashes bloom into new life. This is the slow, brutal alchemy of healing. It demands everything you have. Your courage, your patience, your willingness to sit with the darkness until it reveals its secrets. Because only in that darkness will you find your own light. And only then will you breathe freely, no longer chained to another's breath, no longer gasping for love like air. You will learn to be oxygen itself. You will come home to yourself. And that is the real revolution.